"It's your fault you got pregnant," he sneered, tossing the positive test into the designer trash can. "You forgot your suppressants. I am not ruining my corporate legacy for your calculated mistake." 1 year later, that same arrogant alpha froze staring at me, pushing a custom triple stroller. Morgan Bennett never harbored delusions of a fairy tale ending. As a junior architectural drafter working at the prestigious firm of Harrington and Company in downtown Boston, he knew his place. He was a working-class Omega, surviving on sheer talent late nights and a strict regimen of scent blockers. Jordan Harrington was the opposite. He was the heir apparent to the Harrington real estate empire, an alpha whose pheromones smelled of dark roast coffee and expensive amber strong enough to command a boardroom without speaking a word. Their paths were never supposed to cross beyond pleasantries in the elevator, but a late-night project deadline, a sudden thunderstorm, and an unexpected heat cycle had blurred the boundaries of their professional reality. What started as a desperate pheromone-fueled mistake turned into a clandestine 6-month affair. Morgan loved him. He loved the rare moments when Jordan's ruthless exterior melted away, leaving a tired man who would bury his face in Morgan's neck, breathing in his natural scent of rain and cedar. But in the daylight, Jordan was a ghost. They never went on dates. They only met in the sterile luxury of Jordan's Beacon Hill penthouse, arriving and leaving in separate Ubers to avoid the paparazzi that hounded Boston's elite. Then came the morning everything shattered. Morgan had felt the nausea for weeks, the extreme fatigue, the sudden aversion to his morning coffee, the way his inner Omega felt a restless, protective urge. When the plastic stick displayed 2 undeniable pink lines, his world stopped. He wasn't on his suppressants during their last encounter. There had been a nationwide shortage, a detail he had tearfully explained to Jordan, who had waved it off in the heat of the moment, promising he would be careful. He wasn't. Standing in the expansive marble kitchen of the penthouse, Morgan trembled as he handed over the test. Jordan didn't pull him into an embrace. He didn't smile. His jaw clenched, and the scent in the room turned instantly bitter, smelling of burnt coffee and ozone. "Is this a joke?" Jordan asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "No, Nate," Morgan whispered, wrapping his arms around his own waist. "I'm pregnant. I know it's a surprise, but we cannot do anything." Jordan cut him off, stepping back as if Morgan was carrying a contagion. "I am stepping in as CEO in 2 months. The board is already breathing down my neck about stability, pushing me to court Sebastian Kensington to merge our assets. An illegitimate child with a junior drafter. It's career suicide." Morgan's heart plummeted. You told me you didn't want to marry Sebastian. You said you cared about me." "I care about my reality, Morgan," Jordan snapped, walking over to his desk and pulling out a checkbook. He scribbled a number so large it made Morgan sick to his stomach, tearing the slip of paper off and placing it coldly on the granite island. "It's your fault you got pregnant. You forgot your suppressants. I am not ruining my corporate legacy for your calculated mistake. Take this, handle it, and don't come back to the office on Monday. I'll make sure HR gives you a glowing severance package." The cruelty in his voice was absolute. There was no hesitation, no flicker of the man who had held him the night before. "Take this. Handle it." Those words echoed in Morgan's mind, a harsh reality check. He didn't cry in front of Jordan. He simply placed the positive test next to the check, turned on his heel, and walked out of the penthouse. He left the money behind. Within 48 hours, Morgan had erased his existence from Boston. He packed his modest apartment into his best friend Liam's beat-up Volvo. He changed his phone number, deleted his social media, and vanished. If Jordan wanted to pretend he didn't exist, Morgan would make it incredibly easy for him. Portland, Maine offered a quiet refuge. The salty, frigid air of the Atlantic Ocean helped mask Morgan's distress, providing a sensory shield against the bustling world he had left behind. Liam had generously offered his spare bedroom, demanding nothing in return, but rent when Morgan could afford it. Morgan transitioned into freelance graphic design and remote drafting, taking any job he could find on online forums under an alias. But as the weeks passed, the physical toll of his pregnancy became impossible to ignore. His belly was swelling at a terrifying rate, and the exhaustion was bone deep. At 12 weeks, Liam dragged him to a local clinic. Dr. Harrison, a gentle beta with decades of experience, hovered the ultrasound wand over Morgan's stomach. The silence in the room stretched on for an uncomfortable eternity. "Morgan," Dr. Harrison said, his brow furrowing as he adjusted the monitor. "Did you have a family history of multiples?" "Multiples?" Morgan choked out, squeezing Liam's hand. "You mean twins?" Dr. Harrison turned the screen so Morgan could see. "No, I mean triplets." The rhythmic swish, swish, swish of 3 distinct, tiny, racing hearts filled the small room. Morgan burst into tears, a chaotic mix of profound love and abject terror. Carrying one alpha's child without the sire's scent and pheromonal support was dangerous for an omega. Carrying 3 was a medical nightmare. The biological bond between an omega and an alpha wasn't just romantic, it was physiological. Without Jordan's scent to soothe his nervous system, Morgan's body was in a constant state of distress, believing the sire had abandoned the pack. The next 6 months were a battle for survival. Morgan's nesting instincts went into overdrive, but no matter how many blankets he arranged, the nest felt empty and wrong. He would break into Liam's closet, sobbing into his friend's flannel shirts, desperate for an alpha scent, even if it wasn't the right one. His blood pressure spiked. The medical bills began piling up on the small kitchen table, a mountain of paper that threatened to crush him. At 32 weeks, Morgan collapsed in the grocery store aisle. He woke up to the sterile, blinding lights of Portland General Hospital, the agonizing pain of contractions tearing through his abdomen. It was too early. "We have to do an emergency C-section," Dr. Harrison barked, running alongside Morgan's gurney. "Their heart rates are dropping. The Omega's body is failing under the strain." "Save them," Morgan gasped, gripping the doctor's scrubs with terrifying strength. "Please, just save my babies." When Morgan finally awoke, the world felt hollow and raw. The physical agony of the surgery was secondary to the horrific emptiness in his womb. Panic seized him until Liam's face swam into view, eyes red and puffy from crying. "They're alive, Ollie," Liam whispered, brushing sweaty hair from Morgan's forehead. "They're in the NICU. They're so small, but they're fighters. 2 boys and a girl." Over the next 2 months, Morgan practically lived in the humming, blinking neon world of the NICU. He named them Finn Jude and Little Harper. They were tiny, fragile creatures hooked up to a terrifying array of tubes and monitors. And as they grew, the undeniable truth emerged. They were the spitting image of Jordan Harrington. They had the same dark hair, the same sharp jawlines, even as infants, and the undeniable dormant spark of alpha genetics. Surviving financially required miracles. Morgan maxed out credit cards, took out high-interest loans, and worked on design commissions while sitting in a plastic hospital chair next to the incubators. When they were finally cleared to go home, Morgan had to scour Facebook Marketplace for weeks until he found a battered custom triple stroller he could afford. Life became a relentless, exhausting blur of formula diapers, crying and drafting blueprints at 3 a.m, with a baby strapped to his chest. He was stretched so thin he was nearly translucent, But when he looked down at his 3 children, a fierce protective fire burned away the exhaustion. They were his, entirely his. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Boston, Jordan Harrington had everything he claimed he wanted. He was the CEO. He had a stunning high society Omega fiancé named Sebastian, who looked perfect in photographs and never asked for emotional intimacy. He had the corner office, the power, and the legacy. Yet Jordan couldn't sleep. For the past year, an inexplicable gnawing void had settled in his chest. At night, he would pace his cavernous penthouse, a phantom scent of rain and cedar haunting his senses. He found himself violently rejecting Sebastian's attempts at affection, his inner alpha, snarling in disgust at the wrong scent, the wrong touch. His breaking point came on a Tuesday in November. Jordan was sitting in a boardroom, finalizing a multi-million-dollar acquisition, when a sudden, inexplicable sharp pain lanced through his chest, the exact moment Morgan's heart had stopped briefly on the operating table, months prior. A phantom echo of a severed bond he didn't know existed. He had hired private investigators quietly, at first convincing himself he just wanted to tie up loose ends. But Morgan Bennett had disappeared like smoke. It wasn't until a real estate convention in Portland, exactly 1 year after that fateful morning in the penthouse, that fate intervened. Jordan had stepped out of the luxury convention center to escape the suffocating crowd of sycophants. He needed air. He walked down toward the historic waterfront, pulling the collar of his designer coat up against the bitter Maine wind. That was when the scent hit him. It was faint, buried under layers of ocean salt and cheap baby powder, but it struck Jordan like a physical blow. Rain and cedar. He stopped dead in his tracks. His heart slammed against his ribs as his eyes scanned the bustling sidewalk. There, struggling to push a massive, cumbersome triple stroller over a crack in the pavement, was a painfully thin young man in an oversized faded sweater. Jordan couldn't breathe. He took a hesitant step forward, the noise of the city fading into white noise. Morgan. He breathed out the name, tasting like ash on his tongue. The Omega froze. Slowly, Morgan turned his head. His eyes, framed by dark, exhausted circles, widened in absolute horror. And there, sitting side by side in the stroller, were 3 identical, dark-haired infants. 3 babies with eyes that belonged unmistakably to the Harrington bloodline. Time seemed to fracture, splitting into 1,000 jagged pieces as the harsh Maine wind whipped between them. Jordan Harrington, the ruthless corporate titan of Boston, stood completely paralyzed on the cracked pavement. His expensive wool overcoat fluttered in the freezing breeze, but he did not feel the cold. All he could feel was the sudden violent roaring of his inner alpha, a primal instinct that clawed at his chest, demanding he fall to his knees before the battered triple stroller. Morgan's breath hitched, forming tiny white clouds in the frigid air. The exhaustion that permanently etched his features momentarily vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He instinctively positioned his thin frame between the imposing alpha and the stroller, a fragile shield of faded cotton and desperate resolve. "Don't you dare!" Morgan whispered, his voice trembling but laced with a venom Jordan had never heard before. "Don't you dare look at them!" "Morgan." Jordan choked out the syllables, scraping against his throat like glass. He took a stumbling step forward, his polished Italian leather shoes scraping against the dirty concrete. His dark eyes darted frantically from Morgan's hollow cheeks to the 3 bundled infants. Little Finn was sleeping soundly, a tiny knit cap pulled over his dark hair. Jude was chewing on a plastic teething ring, his sharp, bright eyes, identical to Jordan's, staring blankly at the stranger. and Harper, fragile little Harper, was fussing softly under a thick wool blanket. "Are they—" Jordan couldn't finish the sentence. The math was violently simple. 1 year. 3 babies. The overwhelming, undeniable scent of his own genetics wrapping around them like an invisible tether. "They are mine," Morgan hissed, gripping the foam handle of the stroller so tightly his knuckles turned a ghastly white. "They are solely and entirely mine. You made your choice in that penthouse, Jordan. You handed me a check and told me it was my fault. You told me to handle it. Well, I handled it. Now walk away." The memory of his own cruel words struck Jordan with the force of a physical blow. "I am not ruining my corporate legacy for your calculated mistake." The arrogance of his past self made him want to vomit right there on the sidewalk. He reached out a shaking hand, desperate to just touch the edge of the stroller to confirm this wasn't a cruel hallucination brought on by a year of sleepless nights and phantom scents. "Don't touch them," Morgan shouted, the sound echoing sharply down the waterfront. A few passing pedestrians paused, glancing over, but Morgan didn't care. His scent flared defensively, a sharp, acrid burst of burnt cedar and panic that sent a wave of physical pain through Jordan. "You lost the right to touch them the second you threw me out like garbage. You don't get to waltz back into my life just because you happened to trip over us on the street. Ollie, please." Jordan begged a sound so foreign to him that it barely registered as his own voice. The CEO, who commanded boardrooms with a single glare, was now pleading on a dirty sidewalk. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know it was triplets. I didn't know you would almost die." "How could you know anything?" Morgan laughed, a bitter, broken sound that offered no humor. "You didn't care to know. You changed the security codes to the building before I even packed my desk. You threatened to ruin my career. I spent 6 months in a hospital chair. Jordan, I nearly bled to death on an operating table because my body was collapsing without a sire's scent to stabilize the pregnancy. My friend Liam had to hold my hand while they cut me open to save them, because their own father was too busy planning his high society wedding to Sebastian Kensington." Jordan physically recoiled, the color draining completely from his face. The realization of what his absence had done to an Omega carrying his pups, carrying multiples, was horrifying. In the Alpha-Omega dynamic, abandonment during a high-risk pregnancy was considered practically barbaric, a biological death sentence. "Morgan, I am so sorry," Jordan whispered, tears finally breaking free and tracking down his aristocratic cheekbones. "I was a coward. I was a blind, arrogant fool. Save it." Morgan interrupted his voice, dropping to a dangerously calm octave. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective fire. "You want to know the real tragedy, Jordan? I actually loved you. I thought the man who held me in the dark was the real you, but you proved me wrong. You are exactly who the tabloids say you are: cold, calculating, and empty." Before Jordan could formulate a response, a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. He spun around, coming face to face with a tall, broad-shouldered beta holding a bag of groceries. It was Liam. Liam's eyes were narrowed into furious slits, recognizing the Alpha instantly from the whispered confessions and tear-soaked nights. "Back away from him, Harrington," Liam growled, shoving Jordan backward with surprising force. He said, "Walk away." Jordan stumbled his alpha instincts, screaming to fight back, to tear the beta away from his Omega and his pups. But the crushing weight of his guilt paralyzed him. He watched, utterly destroyed, as Liam gently placed a hand on the small of Morgan's back, guiding him and the massive triple stroller away down the street. Jordan didn't follow. He stood frozen on the sidewalk for hours, until the main sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the city into a freezing, unforgiving darkness. The next morning, Jordan did not attend the real estate convention. Instead, he boarded a private jet back to Boston, a terrifying silent rage brewing inside him. He needed answers. Morgan had mentioned threats to his career, something Jordan had never explicitly ordered. He had been cruel, yes, but he had never told HR to blacklist Morgan. Storming into the Harrington and Company skyscraper, Jordan bypassed his own corner office and kicked open the heavy oak doors to his father's suite. Montgomery Harrington looked up from his mahogany desk, raising a silver eyebrow at his son's dramatic entrance. "Jordan, you are supposed to be in Portland securing the waterfront deal," Montgomery stated calmly, sipping a glass of scotch. "What did you do to Morgan Bennett?" Jordan demanded, his voice a low, feral growl that made the glass in the windows imperceptibly vibrate. Montgomery sighed, setting the crystal glass down. "I see the past has finally caught up with you. I simply cleaned up your mess, Jordan. When HR flagged the sudden resignation and the exorbitant severance check you authorized, I had my people look into it. A pregnant Omega drafter. It was a disaster waiting to happen. You threatened him," Jordan realized, stepping closer to the desk, his hands balling into fists. "I told him to leave, but you made sure he couldn't survive. I made sure he understood that if he ever attempted to extort this family, he would never work in this industry again." Montgomery corrected smoothly. "I protected your future. I protected the merger with the Kensington family. Speaking of which, Sebastian is expecting you for dinner tonight to finalize the wedding guest list." Jordan stared at his father, truly seeing the monster that had shaped him. The legacy he had sacrificed Morgan for was nothing but a foundation built on ruthlessness and blood. "There is no wedding," Jordan said, his voice dropping into a deadly, absolute calm. "And there is no merger. I am voiding the Kensington contract." Montgomery stood up, slamming his hands on the desk. "You will do no such thing. You are the CEO of this company." "Not anymore," Jordan replied, reaching into his coat pocket and tossing his heavy gold keycard onto the mahogany desk. "I am stepping down, effective immediately. You can keep your legacy, father. It cost me the only real thing I ever had." Jordan Harrington vanished from Boston high society overnight. The tabloids went absolutely wild. The runaway billionaire screamed the headlines. Sebastian Kensington gave a tearful, highly publicized interview claiming Jordan had lost his mind. Montgomery Harrington scrambled to maintain stock prices, but without Jordan's ruthless genius at the helm, the company's shares plummeted. Jordan didn't care. He had liquidated his personal trusts, packed a single duffel bag, and moved into a modest, unassuming apartment in Portland, barely 3 blocks from where Liam and Morgan lived. He didn't barge into their lives. He knew he had lost that privilege. Instead, he started from the absolute bottom. The first olive branch came in the form of a thick manila envelope slipped under Liam's front door. Inside were documents establishing a multi-million-dollar irrevocable trust for Finn Jude and Harper, entirely independent of the Harrington estate, along with fully paid receipts for every single one of Morgan's outstanding medical bills. There was no note, no demand for visitation. Just silent financial atonement. For weeks, Jordan shadowed them from a distance. He learned their routines. He watched Morgan struggle to push the triple stroller through the snow to the local park. He watched Liam carry groceries, while Morgan balanced a crying Harper on his hip. It was absolute torture, a self-imposed purgatory, watching another man act as the shield for his family. Eventually, the harsh Maine winter brought a terrifying complication. It was mid-January when a vicious strain of respiratory syncytial virus swept through Portland. Because they were premature, the triplets' immune systems were dangerously compromised. When Morgan rushed them to the emergency room in the dead of night, Jude's tiny lungs were failing. Jordan had been sitting in his parked car down the street, a pathetic habit he had developed to make sure they were safe at night when he saw the ambulance arrive. He followed them to Portland General Hospital, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found Morgan in the waiting room, collapsed in a plastic chair, sobbing hysterically into Liam's shoulder. "They need a blood transfusion." Morgan was gasping, practically hyperventilating. "Jude's blood type is incredibly rare, O negative with the alpha genetic marker. The hospital doesn't have enough in the bank. They're airlifting some from Boston, but they said it might not get here in time." Jordan stepped out of the shadows. "I have it," he said, his voice steady despite the absolute terror gripping his soul. Morgan snapped his head up, his tear-streaked face freezing. "I am O negative with the exact genetic marker," Jordan stated, walking directly to the triage nurse's station. "I am his biological sire. Drain whatever you need from me right now." The next few hours were a blur of needles, tubes, and agonizing waiting. Jordan sat in a medical chair, watching his blood flow through a plastic line, praying to whatever deity existed that it wasn't too late. When Dr. Harrison finally emerged, exhaustion written across his face, he offered a small, weary smile. "Jude is stabilizing," the doctor announced. "The transfusion worked. He's going to pull through." Morgan let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, dropping his head into his hands. Jordan quietly detached the bandage from his arm, put on his coat, and prepared to walk away. He had done what he could. He didn't expect a reward. "Wait," Morgan called out softly, his voice echoing in the empty, sterile hallway. Jordan stopped, slowly turning around. Morgan walked up to him, his eyes red and exhausted, but the absolute hatred that had been there months ago was gone, replaced by a profound, complicated weariness. "You saved him." "He's my son Morgan," Jordan said softly. "I would drain every drop of blood in my body if it meant keeping him safe." Morgan stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. "You gave up your company. Liam saw the news. You gave up everything. It meant nothing without you." Jordan confessed, baring his soul in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "I was a coward, Morgan. I was so terrified of failing my father's legacy that I destroyed my own soul. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to take me back. But I am not leaving Portland. I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I am not the man who left you in that penthouse." It wasn't an instant reconciliation. Real life doesn't work like a fairy tale. It started slowly. Jordan was allowed to sit on the park bench, while Morgan let the babies get some fresh air. Then he was allowed to hold Jude, the tiny boy wrapping a fragile hand around Jordan's massive finger, the biological bond finally snapping into place, flooding Jordan's senses with an overwhelming, intoxicating love. Months turned into a year. Jordan proved his devotion through consistency, changing dirty diapers, staying up during the colicky nights, and sitting silently while Morgan worked on his design commissions. The cold, ruthless CEO died, and in his place, a fiercely protective, devoted father was born. One rainy evening, exactly 3 years after the disaster in Boston, Jordan was standing in the kitchen of the modest coastal homes they now shared. He was washing bottles while Finn and Harper chased the family golden retriever around the living room. Morgan walked into the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe, watching him. The Omega's scent was no longer panicked or distressed. It was a rich, warm aroma of cedar and fresh rain, completely saturated with Jordan's dark coffee and amber. Jordan dried his hands and walked over, wrapping his arms around Morgan's waist, pulling him flush against his chest. He pressed a kiss into the crook of Morgan's neck, exactly where the mating bite would one day go. "What are you thinking about?" Jordan murmured. "Just thinking." Morgan smiled, resting his head against Jordan's chest, listening to the steady, strong heartbeat beneath the fabric. About how sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the greatest unexpected realities. Jordan held him tighter, watching his 3 beautiful, chaotic children tackle the dog on the rug. The legacy of Harrington and Company was dead and buried, but as Jordan kissed the top of Morgan's head, he knew he had finally built an empire worth keeping. Thank you so much for listening to this emotional Omegaverse journey. If Morgan and Jordan's dramatic road to redemption captured your heart, please hit that like button to support the channel. Share this video with your friends who love a good twisty romance, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling story. Let me know in the comments, did Jordan redeem himself in the end? See you next time.